Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. I'm Yves Engler. The Foreign Policy Hour is a weekly critical look at Canada's role abroad. Unfortunately, we're going to be truncated again today. It's only going to go, I'll probably only go for 20 minutes. And then if there's any comments or questions, we can do that because we're doing this meeting for the campaign to lead the NDP right at 6:30. So yeah, so I'll get right to it. There's an article about GardaWorld, a big Montreal-based private security company that was cleared to get up to 138 million, I believe is the number of contracts for ICE, the U.S. border detention and expulsion force. And this is just more about GardaWorld. Is they've done other contracts for ICE. They're involved in that what is it called, Alligator Alcatraz down in Florida, and this is a massive, the biggest privately held security company in the world, and involved in all kinds of from Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya. GardaWorld is a something approaching a mercenary firm, and is a big in by the Canadian by Quebec investment fund, pension fund, and all kinds of ties to Canadian military, political officials. The issue with China is ratcheting up. There's China introduced tariffs on or expanded its tariffs on canola, and that got a fair bit of attention this week or in the last few days, um, because there's apparently as many as 200,000 Canadians that are involved in canola in one way or another. So the economic impact is quite significant of these high tariffs that China's introduced, and it's in response, in I think at least in part or maybe entirely, to Canada bringing in high tariffs on electric vehicles, and basically following the U.S. in targeting the burgeoning electric vehicle industry from China. And so this sort of tension is seems to be heating up. It's mostly people, of course, in Saskatchewan and the prairies that are impacted. And so politically, that plays a little bit different than some of the impacts of tariffs and stuff on auto or in steel or whatever that's in more in Ontario. Obviously, the Liberals don't do very well out west, so they probably face a little bit less pressure to be as concerned. But yeah, I mean, I think that the tariffs following the U.S. on the tariffs on electric vehicles didn't seem to be a good move in from my perspective with regards to China. I get why they've done it, but it's I think part of it is economic, but part of it is also this sort of target China kind of dynamic. On that front, there was a story in the front of the National Post, headline, "No Sign of Election Law Breaches, Watchdog." And basically it was about the Han Dong liberal leadership race, his riding, should I say, in Toronto. I'm forgetting the name of the riding now. And basically they came back and said there's no indication of anything untoward that violated Elections Canada rules. So we've got to remember that the whole foreign interference thing, a central storyline, what they ultimately kind of like hung their hat on, was this notion of the Chinese consulate bussing in um, some Chinese students, foreign students, to the nomination race, and it was stated that it was to like support Han Dong, though there was one. commentator, right wing, very anti-China commentator, who I quoted a couple times because she she suggested, she stated that the Han Dong's opponent in that race basically had the same views on China, which would make it pretty odd that the Chinese consulate would be devoting resources to support Han Dong if the alternative was sort of from their perspective the sort of same outlook. I don't know enough to say for sure, but I stated many, many times that I was the fact that the media never went and investigated that angle, i.e., the Han Dong's opponent was like some, raving critic of China, then I basically guarantee you, if that was the case, the media would have stated that and would have made an issue of that. But the fact that they never brought up the views towards China of the his main competitor suggests to me, and like this commentator, this I think she works for the McDonald Laurier Institute. I forget her name, but that basically that they had the same views about China, and she was hostile to those views. Nonetheless, so here we are after the whole foreign interference thing. You have the elections watchdog come back and say there's no evidence of anything that they broke any rules, and also that in this story, they mentioned at the bottom that they'd come to the same conclusion with the Chu, I forget his first name, who was in Richmond, the conservative candidate who complained endlessly about that China had worked to undermine him, and the liberal won, and and um, and apparently, according to just a little brief mention in this National Post story, saying that they had come to previously, I didn't know this. Previously, they'd come to similar conclusions with Chu was his name. I'm forgetting his first name. I've stated many times that the whole foreign interference, the China interference thing, seemed like a manufactured endeavor with pushed by Washington. If there was foreign interference, it was that the pro-U.S. empire forces in Canada were promoting this interference, this Chinese interference angle, and now there's been lots of evidence to suggest that that's more or less confirmed, but certainly don't expect any sort of admission of this fact in any of the or any clear admission of this fact in the by the Globe Mail editorial board or others. There is a story that said, I think it was Ottawa Citizen, I think it was Puglisi, government to follow Canadian military's lead on F-35, defense minister says. And so that suggests that this review, which was Reuters reported, I think I mentioned this last week, that they're saying that the military who's doing the D&D that's doing the review is saying we should stick with the F-35. So the minister is saying that they would basically follow the review, which is a step towards, confirming that we're going to just keep along with the F-35. Now, today's Globe had a piece saying that Melanie Joly, who's the industry minister now, when she's in Sweden, she's going to meet with Saab, the Saab officials, and Saab was the runner-up to the Lockheed Martin for the F-35. So that maybe puts a little bit more of a question mark to a couple of stories that have really seem to be going pretty clearly down the direction that Canada is going to stick with the F-35 with Lockheed Martin, but we will see on that where that goes. I'm guessing that's what's going to happen. Carney has made it pretty clear he's not into standing up to Trump on almost anything, and I'm guessing he's ultimately going to cave on the F-35. There's a story. I actually think it was from last Saturday's Globe, but I read Saturday's Globe just a couple days ago. The saying that the Trump the Americans are going to skip the Pentagon's going to skip the Halifax Security Forum, which is odd because the Halifax Security Forum is actually, despite the name and despite the location of where it takes place, it's actually based in Washington. And it's some joint thing where Canadian government funds part of it, and I believe the Pentagon or U.S. or NATO fund some of it. But it's actually formally based in the U.S. And but it's this militarist talk show. Now this is the sort of it's clearly a militarist talk shop. But this is the sort of stuff that Trump is kind of pushes back on, or it's not completely clear to me why. Uh, but but um, but this is obviously consternation in the sort of official militarist, let's call it deep state, if you like, type of forces, and Trump kind of rocks the boat a little bit in this sort of weird way, considering we know he's obviously a serious militarist and imperialist, but he does sort of rock the boat a little bit, and it seems to be doing so with the Halifax Security Forum. I think all for the better. That's something that however, I'd prefer it was anti-war, anti-imperialist forces that were able to succeed in shutting down or definancing, defunding that forum. But if it's undermined also by I don't know, call it the MAGA forces or whatever, that's okay too, I guess. On that kind of note, obviously Trump and Putin had this little summit in Alaska on Friday, and the Canadian reaction seems to have been this align with the European pro-NATO forces, and Carney participated in the Coalition of the Willing meeting. I'm just, to be honest with you, completely floored that they chose the name Coalition of the Willing. I mean, it just shows you how they don't they double down, right? Like the coalition, the willing for the Iraq War. You think that would just be bad marketing, but they don't really regret maybe Iraq War, or I guess they presume that the public is too ignorant of that history, or and the media won't hold them to account. But anyways. So he participated in the Coalition of the Willing, which is the UK, France, sort of ardent NATO proxy war, European country-led initiative, and he met with he had a talk with Zelensky. The readout from one of these meetings said the Prime Minister emphasized that experience has shown that Russian President Putin cannot be trusted. Therefore, current diplomatic engagement must be reinforced by continued military and economic pressure on Russia to end its aggression. And ultimately, the long-term peace and security of Ukraine must be supported by a strong Ukrainian armed forces, complemented by robust and credible security guarantees from the coalition of the willing and the United States. So Carney he sort of soft-pedaled his criticism of Trump in terms of undermining Zelensky, but all the sort of statements and in this statement I just read from, they talk about the recent 2 billion in weapons and 2.3 billion, I believe it was, in other forms of assistance. It's it's all part of continuing the NATO proxy war. And I think that to me it's really clear that Russia's actions, they see that they have the upper hand. They're just pushing for more territory, better negotiating position, and even that leads to lots more Ukrainian soldiers and civilians killed, or for that matter, Russians. They continue to plow along. I don't like it at all. I don't like Russian invasion, but let's be clear here. It's got to end. I mean, there's got to be some out here, and there needs to be some recognition that we provoked this war, that we were belligerent, and that doesn't that leave the Russians all off the hook, but that we have some significant responsibility in this whole horror show. There's no indication that's coming from anywhere really in Canadian political life, and even though the polling shows Ukrainians increasingly 69% want a peace agreement. The numbers are getting stronger and stronger in the direction of a peace agreement, including with some concessions of land. Public opinion is getting more and more clear in that direction. So we still say we're all about supporting Ukrainians, And but even as Ukrainian opinion gets clearer and clearer in the direction of peace negotiations, the Canadian government hasn't really shifted on that. Shifting gears to the horrors in Gaza, which are just they're mind-numbing, of course, and they don't seem to stop. And this Israeli war machine keeps attacking in Lebanon and destabilizing, and is all these different attacks in Iran and whatnot. Obviously, last week, I think it was we talked about it on Monday. They assassinated half dozen journalists at a tent, including prominent Al Jazeera reporter Dimitris Soudas, who's a commentator on CBC and former director of communications for Harper. His tweet in French about it is just remarkable. It's just, he needed to be eliminated because he's a terrorist. The prominent Al Jazeera reporter. And others were like that. But this is the CBC. I mean, the CBC is still platforming people who are not just genocidaire, but openly calling, openly justifying, and frankly applauding. The Sudas applauded the assassination of a half dozen reporters at a media tent, I believe, on the grounds of a hospital. I mean, that's just remarkable. Um, that this the 22 months into this that the public broadcaster would do that. Now, we had a rally at the CBC office the day after. There was sorry, not the day after, on the Thursday. We did a rally the day after, the next morning in La Presse's office, and then it was the Thursday, sorry, on at the CBC building here. And I know there was demonstrations at lots of CBC buildings across the country. And this journalist who I'm a Facebook friend with, a woman of Haitian descent here, François, is it Michel? I believe it's Michel, François. Um, I've been Facebook friends with her for a number of years because from Haiti related activism and stuff. And so I've crossed paths with her a number of times. And I was at the rally at the CBC building, and it was a silent rally where people had tape on their mouths, and the extent that there was discuss and sitting down, almost every sitting down. A couple of people were standing up with placards, about 30 people. Not in any way, it's a big open area in the CBC building. Not in any way disrupting people's paths, or like no form of disruption whatsoever. Uh, and I was standing up with another person, a woman with had it holding a banner, and I saw her come out of the secure area and walk towards us and start filming the rally, and then go over and talk to what seemed like somebody in the CBC orbit, and then come back out and observe the sit-in, and then walk over 40 feet where there was a vegetable stand at the CBC building, spend I don't know how much time she spent, but a couple minutes and this and that, and then leave. I saw her over, I don't know, a 10-minute, 15-minute period. And and then I watched her reel that she did about what about the sit-in. And she talked about the security, like feeling like insecure. And I watched her. I saw the moment she left the sort of secure area, and her just like walk around, clearly not in any way, shape, or form feeling like there was anything insecure, and hang out there and then go buy vegetables at the stand. She even talks about in her reel. And then she describes the sit-in where the only speaking that happened, or I guess there was a little speech at the start, but really the only speaking that happened was reading out the names of Palestinian journalists being killed. And here you had this CBC journalist describe this as like threatening to her. And it's just like, I mean, she just made this out of nowhere. She just literally is, she just fabricated this as part of creating this line that the anti-genocide forces are threatening or dangerous or whatever, the whole CBC line. I mean, she proved the necessity of the protest, right? She proved that this is the ideology in at the CBC, and so on one hand you have these like crazy genocide supporters like Dimitri Sudas applauding the assassination of a half dozen journalists. And then you have the more sort of mainstream liberal part of CBC who they take reading out the names of Palestinian journalists, people sitting down at the CBC building, they take that as sort of like a threat. Um, it's 22 months into the Holocaust. It's pretty remarkable. An even more remarkable development in the recent days is this attack that's appeared mostly on Facebook against me. A whole bunch of leftists started off with this guy, Ben, I think it's Ben Marilinski or something like that, and starts off as his attack against Socialist Caucus or Socialist Action for presenting my, asking me to run for the NDP leadership, and includes the first phase of it includes basically, Eve's. It's softer language, but if Eve's anti-Semitic, is what a strong insinuation in that direction. And then he follows it up with like stronger attack in that direction, and then a whole bunch of different people have jumped in. Is all kinds of some things that are sort of fascinating in it. There's some Facebook account responding that puts out a section of a private email I sent 9 years ago to this woman Nava. I don't remember her last name. Who was criticizing me for articles basically pushing back against the racism in the Kane Jewish News and the racism of Zionist supporters. And she was pushing back against me and basically suggesting I was being anti-Semitic or whatever. And I wrote this response, and people can read it. It's been posted. The full thing's been posted. It initially comes from some like a Facebook account that had like 4 followers. So obviously some sort of, I don't know if it's a bot account or it's somebody in some political orbit wanting to release this letter, and people can read it. I honestly, this this I mean I maybe slightly wording here or there that could have been changed a little bit, but the basics of the point are just statements of fact, really. And this woman who frames herself as a pro-Palestinian, this is one of the people like Judy Rebick have pushed this and said, basically, there's a whole thing saying, oh, Eve's got to be excluded from the NDP race because he's anti-Semitic. Judy Rebick has jumped in and boosted that and saying right on, and had a couple of posts on this. This one person, Sarah Leventhal Shartol, who I don't know much about. She has lots of posts about Palestine. She seems to have went to university in Israel. I don't know if she's actually an Israeli. She refers to this email as, quote, Eve's letter is the most deeply anti-Semitic restatement of core historic anti-Jewish memes I have read in Canada. So this letter, which like includes like an explicit thing, a statement about saying, anti-Semitism is wrong, but then challenges this attack against me for, going into quote unquote tropes and stuff like that. I mean, like, it's just the hyperbole is so beyond belief. But this is what a significant segment, I hate to say, of particularly Jewish, but not only Jewish, self-identified pro-Palestinian people are at. 22 months in the Holocaust, they are still continuing with this. And someone like Judy Rebick, in 22 months of these horrors, is publicly saying basically Eve's an anti-Semite. He shouldn't be allowed in the race. Or she's kind of she when I questioned her on saying that, because if you look at what the alternative candidates have said or done, there are far worse things that they've said or done than anything I've accused of saying or doing. But so she says, "Oh no, I'm not. I don't. I think you should be allowed to run." But then, everyone knows you're, in fact, by doing this, you're basically trying to ensure the NDP, which wants to have an excuse to block me anyways. You know that this just feeds into them the justification for blocking. Um, in IJV chat I was sent. there's a whole bunch of people saying, "Oh, he's an anti-Semite." Da, da, da. There's people pushing back. There's people like Robert Massoud, Rabbi Mivisar pushing back. But there's a whole bunch of people like, and to the point where Paul Weinberg is saying that for the sake of the Palestine movement, Eve has to be it has to not be allowed to run. It has to be because to protect the Palestine movement, we have to reject Eve's candidacy. Now, at the same time, you have Jeremy Levy, the mayor of Hampstead today, once again, now I think the third time, he's got a long post saying Eve Engler needs to be blocked from the race. The fact he hasn't been blocked already is a sign that the NDP is anti-Semitic. You have Mayor Weinstein, what, three, four, I don't know how many different posts now saying the same thing. So here you have IJV, Paul Weinberg, who I know, who's interviewed a number of times, Mayor Weinstein and Jeremy Levy, all coming to a consensus agreement that Eve Engler shouldn't be allowed to participate in the NDP leadership race. It's remarkable. It's stunning. 22 months into the ethnic cleansing, genocide, with the intention, let's be very clear, the intention is, Smoldrich and the likes have been clear about this, is to drive out all non-Jews from Gaza, and they would hope to replace non-Jews with Jewish settlers in Gaza. And yet, 22 months in, you still have this type of dynamic. It's stunning. Clearly, the racism in the Canadian left is remarkable when it comes to anti-Palestinian racism. As I wrote in that piece, critical of John Clark's attack against Caitlin Johnson back in January. The reality is that Jewish supremacy is a much bigger problem in the left than anti-Semitism is. And I think the clearest proof of that is people who have used the word anti-Semitism more times than they use the word Jewish supremacy. 22 months into a genocide on behalf of ethnically cleansing all non-Jews from Gaza, almost all of the Canadian left has referred to anti-Semitism more than they've referred to Jewish supremacy. And it's remarkable. They, of course, claim that using the word Jewish supremacy to describe Israel is anti-Semitism. I don't know what you do in that situation, considering that's the whole raison d'être of Zionism. But we are where we are. Final note: I did a piece just about Dahlia Kurtz's doxing of me and putting out her lawsuit. Dahlia Kurtz and Neil Oberman in their lawsuit. That Leviathan count, put out my address, posted it pretty prominently, and what's amazing about this is Dahlia Kurtz in the defamation suit against me. There's on the first page says we will not be giving her home address, which I guess is the law in Quebec. I didn't know that, but we will not be giving her home address because Eve and his supporters are violent, and basically I would dox her, and so while she's complaining about being doxxed, she's doxing me in this document, which is just absolutely remarkable. I actually gone on too long. We're not going to have any time for questions because we've got to break firm at 6:30. I guess two other things that Paul Hutchison, the consul here in Montreal, he intervened in an NDP leadership race, attacking me. But there's no comment on that foreign interference. Yeah, unfortunately, I have to actually end it there because we got to get on to the second thing, and it's on the same Zoom account. But yeah, thanks everyone. And if anyone wants to participate in the volunteer meeting, it's taking place right now. I'm going to speak briefly about some campaign stuff, and then it's going to be a broader meeting. Thanks. Take care, everyone.